All right.
What does the screen say?
This one?
Yeah.
Says live.
All right. Okay. So you're on camera.
You might have to switch it to ours.
Oh.
Oh, they didn't do it right.
Remember I told you to change your sharing settings?
Spencer.
You're gonna have to crop out.
I'll edit this in post.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So if somebody wanted to watch this, they didn't stand around for a minute to look at Spencer putts on his phone.
Who has access? What the heck? Okay. Right.
Anyone
Sharing
with a
link
link.
is on. Okay. Anyone with link can view.
There.
Okay. All right.
All right. All right. A modifier may be a one-word adverb, adjective, or phrase.
It can be an adverb, which is a word or phrase that modifies or quantifies an adjective, verb, or other adverb or a word group.
An adjective is a word or phrase naming an attribute added to or grammatically related to a noun to modify or describe it.
And a phrase is a small group of words standing together as a conceptual unit, typically forming a component of a clause.
And we use modifiers to describe, focus, or qualify the nouns, pronouns, and adverbs that it's modifying.
When you use it incorrectly, it can cause verbose, and flory.
That's the whole thing.
Yep.
So when we talk about grammar as rhetoric and style, could you walk us through like an example of how this works? It's like I walked you through how parallelism works and why it's important in an essay. Could you walk us through how this works?
It's important because it helps bring your what you're emphasizing about words and clauses.
What are some examples of like adverbs?
Some adverbs is like, let's say you think something's like pretty cool, like you could be like, it looks very shiny, or like it's light blue. You know what I mean?
Tell me what you mean.
Okay, so I mean like you like emphasize like how you feel about what you are talking about.
Like so light blue, what's the modifier there?
Light.
Like light is modifying what?
Blue.
Okay, so light is an adverb, adjective, or phrase.
Adverb.
Adjective, because it's modifying blue, a noun.
Yes.
Okay. So light blue is an example of an adjective. Give me some more adjective examples.
Like could say something like it is very cool. Like instead of saying like oh it's cool, like it's very cool.
Okay, so what's your adjective there?
Very
And that's describing what?
cool.
Okay, why don't you give me an example of an adverb?
A lot of adverbs end in ly.
This is a true story.
So like
Sadly.
Disney World is extremely magical.
Okay. So what's the adverb?
Extremely
And that's modifying what?
magical.
Which magical is also modifying what? Disney.
World.
So we have extremely modifying magical modifying Disney. Extremely is an example of an adverb. Give me an example of a phrase that's modifying.
So you could have like a paragraph talking about like Disney World, and then you have a separate phrase that emphasizes how you feel about it. That talks about how cool it is.
What's a sentence structure that you know about that would be an example of a phrase that modifies something?
Noun and positive.
Noun and positive. How is a noun and positive a phrase that modifies something?
Because it's independent and stands alone, and it describes.
Now tell me about how when these things are used incorrectly, they can cause things to be verbose and flowery.
It like if you use too many of them, it just does not sound good. And if you use them incorrectly, your point can not get across how you want it to.
So did the text say anything at all about what these things look like when they're well done, or did it just say what they look like when they're busted?
Busted.
So when you're watching out for adverbs, adjectives, and phrases, you're making sure that they're good to go, and if they're not good to go, they're going to cause writing to be verbose and flowery. What does verbose mean?
It's like using too many, a lot of verbs and stuff.
What does flowery mean?
When stuff doesn't flow very well, like it's choppy.
Is that flowery or flowery?
Glory.
Flowery?
I think so. I think I wrote it down wrong, but or autocorrect.
Well, according to the text, when your
It's
adverb,
flowery.
when your modifiers are not well chosen,
Yeah.
does that create problems with flow?
Yes.
Or does that create problems with things trying to sound too fancy and special?
Yeah. Fancy and special.
So not flow.
Yeah.
What page numbers were this on?
What?
What page numbers?
8, 7, something.
7, 8.
8, 7, 8. something
Or
like
7, 1.
All right, you guys may sit down.
that. Okay. Thanks.
Did you just say we killed it?
Okay, I'm looking at rhetorical and stylistic strategy. Modifiers can enliven, focus, or qualify ideas. That would be important to know. The placement of modifiers can add or detract from these effects. So where they're placed can do a good job of enlivening, focusing, or qualifying ideas, or could do a bad job of those things. That would be a concept that you need to be able to walk us through in order for us to successfully understand modifiers. And then do not use too many modifiers. Do not rely on adjectives when strong verbs are more effective. Beware of adding too many qualifiers. Those would be 3 points that you want to be able to walk us through. So this presentation, we're just going to cut, okay? And you need to read and understand that rhetorical and stylistic strategy and be able to communicate that to your peers. We're done at 9:30, right? But by 9:30. So get out in the hallway and get this stuff figured out so that you can come back in and give us a better understanding of modifiers. Got it? Okay. Kyler, what's yours again?
The different sentences.
And the page numbers?
So it's 9. I think it's 991 to 994. I think.
All right.
Don't quote me on that.
991.
I was close. Okay, so sentences: common, collimative, periodic, and inverted. Okay, so common sentences have a subject followed by a verb, such as he likes dogs. The subject in this one being the subject being he, the verb being likes, and what I can't remember what dots are called.
Object.
Yeah, dots are the object. And then subjects followed by a verb and a subject complement, such as Even the smile on the addikt's face is addicting. The subject would be the smile, which is on the addict's face. And then the verb would be is, followed by the object of addicting. And then the subject followed by a verb and a direct object, such as we trusted the government. The subject being we, the verb being trusted, and the direct object being the government. Okay, common like mashups is basically just like placing one sentence pattern and then adding another one through like compound sentences and like just laying them out one and then the other. Like they befriended him because even his smile was kind. We need to step away from simpler sentences like that and go to more complex sentences, such as what I will show. So the reason why you need to do that is because writing too many of your sentences with the common structures makes the piece boring, and it makes it hard for you to like keep your audience's attention. It makes it so that it seems a lot more monotone, and without any emphasis, it's hard for your reader to keep their interest in the piece and to actually get what you're trying to portray. Cumulative, aka loose sentence. So it starts with the common pattern sentence, then accumulates details after it, hence the name. Details can be subordinate clauses or different kinds of phrases, like nonapositives, for example, such as they swirled through the air, leaving one to hum. Have you ever heard the wolf cry to the blue torn moon in a desire to paint? Or he ventured farther through the creaky door, past the dark parking lot, over the fog-ridden graves, and through the woods to grandmother's house. By doing this, you're able to add more. So if you don't add the extra details at the end of it, then it can be harder for your audience to try and figure out what the sentence is about. And in a paragraph, you might need more clarification. So using a cumulative sentence, a loose sentence, makes it so that you can add that information at the end of the sentence while still being on topic. Periodic sentence begins with multiple details and holds off a standard sentence pattern, or at least its predicate, until the end. For example, fear, the monster that calls over you to tower over you and steal the breath from your lungs as it rises above your chest into a standing position and holds you in place, is as large as you give it power to be. And here, I start with my subject, go on to describe the subject with a nonapositive, then go to my verb and continue my sentence. Inverted sentence, putting the verb before the subject, pretty self-explanatory. For example, in the family is very fine the least love. Beyond the logic is very fine the justification. With inverted sentences, it causes the reader to slow down what they're reading and be able to find the subject. And this also works if you're doing sentence fragments, because you can be used to add emphasis to the point that you're making and can slow the reader down so that they have to absorb what they're reading more and they can't just like buzz through it. And I think that's it.
Could you please just recap the point of common sentences?
Okay, so the point of common sentences is to have like your subject and your verbs to make it like easy to read and understand, because that's what we most commonly write in. So by having your common sentences, you're able to make it so it's very easy for your reader to follow and like lays out your main point.
The point of cumulative sentences.
Cumulative sentences makes it so that you can clarify and like get more specific with what it is that you're discussing. And the same thing with the other one, periodic.
And in cumulative, the details in the sentence happen where?
At the end.
And in a periodic.
Periodic is at the beginning.
Okay, so if I start simple and then I get into nitty gritty details, I'm cumulative.
Mm-hmm.
If I start nitty gritty and then I get to the simple thing, then I'm periodic.
Yep.
And the point of both of those is to add detail.
Yep, to add detail and to add clarification.
And inverted forces the reader to
Slow down.
slow down. Okay, so when you're thinking about or you're considering rhetorical effect of these types of things, that would be the important things to know. Very good, Mr. Johnson. All right, who's next? Who's next?
Are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are what again?
Short, simple sentences. What else?
What type of sentences are short, simple sentences?
Kyler? Common.
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 I pay attention.
I
didn't too, Jet.
Like that introduce the smaller idea to greater, so the bigger idea.
Good time. What page number is your
no.
stuff on?
506.
Hey, don't take my ideas.
Oh my goodness. What?
So I guess it would make more sense to have that.
Present.
Fancy.
Oh, wow. Wonderful shading.
All right, so short and simple sentences convey a complete thought, and they need an independent clause, a subject, and a verb. You read the next two.
Oh, you read both. Sorry. So what a short, simple sentences contain or can contain at least is a compound verb, a modifier, an object, and a complement. And it's used after long sentences as a summary of what the writer just said to get the point across, and as a transition between sentences or paragraphs.
And then the rhetorical effect is one or two short, simple sentences create emphasis by contrast. Putting a short, simple sentence around longer sentences will call attention to them.
And then sentence fragments are an incomplete sentence that readers understand to be complete, does not convey a complete thought, and they must contain one dependent clause.
What they can contain are a subject and a verb to go along with the dependent clause. And they're used to make a transition, signal conclusion, emphasize an important point, and economize an expression, which I learned what that means.
The rhetorical effect of sentence fragments is sentence fragments stand out and they add emphasis when used intentionally and frequently and infrequently.
Oh, there's an example.
I just wrote that in.
An example of that would be because I forgot to pick up the eggs.
Yeah, I just wrote that one.
Was what?
Because I forgot to pick up the eggs. So like after saying something about something else about eggs.
So, could you please recap again so I use short, simple sentences to transition, and what else?
Use them to transition, signal conclusion, emphasize an important point, and economize expression.
How does a short, simple sentence used in between paragraphs help it transition?
It takes away from the
It pulls together the longer sentences and it pushes more attention towards the longer, more important sentences.
Well, that would be helping emphasize something. So if I have, you want to think about it this way. If I have a bunch of long sentences and then I get to a short, simple sentence, the mere fact that I have a short, simple after a bunch of long is going to emphasize the short, simple because something's different, right? Okay, now what the content of that short, simple sentence, that determines its effect. If my short, simple sentence is summarizing what was the long stuff, now the effect of that short, simple is to do what? Emphasize an important point, right?
to make sure.
So I use that short, simple after a bunch of long, and if I'm recapping stuff, I'm emphasizing a point. Okay. If the content of the short, simple is to introduce or summarize an idea that's coming next, now the effect of my short, simple is to do what?
to like preview what's about to come.
Use a word you have up there. Transition. Okay. So the placement of a short, simple helps emphasize it, right? After using it after or surrounded by long stuff.
Yeah.
And then if my short, simple is recapping, well, then I'm summarizing or I'm trying to emphasize something. If my short, simple is alluding to what's happening next, then it's transitioning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about economize expression?
So, you guys ever heard of an economy car before?
I have not. Have you?
Lindy pretty much explained this. Okay. Anybody? Ethan, what's an economy car?
That'd be a car that runs on both electric and gas. That's a hybrid. An economy car is a car with a really great gas mileage.
There you go. To get from point A to point B.
Honda Civic.
The ones where if you
So-
finish, you might total your own vehicle.
So economize expression means you're just trying to get from point A to point B without taking away from the point you're making with the other sentences or outside of it.
So if I have I have these longer sentences, right, that are kind of walking through a complex idea or a complex one.
Yeah.
And then I have my short
Harry
simple
Potter.
that summarizes that. How have I economized the expression?
Kyler.
No.
Oh, dude. Say it again.
I have a bunch of long sentences.
Yep.
I'm walking through this complex idea. And because it's complex, it demands I use complex sentences to explain.
Yep.
Right? But then I want to use my short simple, I want to emphasize something. So I have these long sentences explaining this complex idea, and then I kind of summarize that in a short, simple sentence, in a short, simple way. How have I economized expression?
It helped take all the longer information, and if you're summarizing in one, it's helping the reader determine from the point A that you're making the longer sentences, and it helps kind of bring them all together to get to the point B.
Very good. Kind of the same thing if I'm making an argument. Let's say I'm trying to make an argument that Logan is a terrible person.
Thank you.
So I start with a paragraph about Logan's upbringing and how he was raised by savages. And then I have this other paragraph that chronicles Logan's misdeeds to small animals. And then I have this other paragraph that chronicles
Cats.
Logan's bullying of small children, even though he's in high school. Goes down to elementary school during lunch, just says the most terrible things.
Right.
And then I have a paragraph about how Logan, what's another terrible thing he can do? Oh, he drives a truck at night and tries to run over as many cats as he can.
There you go, Lindy. Perfect.
Okay. So I have all of these paragraphs that chronicle Logan doing all of these terrible things. How could I use a short, simple sentence to emphasize the point I'm making?
You wouldn't introduce a new idea. You would just summarize what you just talked about, like all 4 points into one short.
Bingo.
simple-
And would I use all of the details?
No, you just give
I
the
would say,
The gist.
general point.
yeah. And could a short, simple sentence be something like, so because Logan bullies kids, kills cats, and was raised by savages, he's a terrible person? Can that be a short, simple sentence? Yeah. It doesn't. A short, simple sentence doesn't necessarily need to be a common sentence. A short, simple sentence just needs to simply state things. Does that make sense? One and all?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Really a big fan of that chart.
Anthony
Would have been
made it.
better if we would have had some like examples.
Gotcha.
of
There's
how-
an example at the bottom.
Yeah, we got one example.
I was about to write in the second one for the short simple sentences.
Mhm.
I didn't have that.
Classic time. All right, mid-mood.
Like pie.
Just kidding, Z.
What did you say?
Press the exit, or sorry, on that press the
Just
escape
want
button.
to it out of the car.
Okay.
On the bottom. Something like that. But she
All right,
said,
all right.
whenever she walks in her house, she's like, can we just leave the door open so they can run out? She's so weird.
What the?
I like that one, Lindy.
Why waste time?
Yeah.
Not words when few words do trick.
Hey guys, I'm here to talk about concise diction.
Not short, simple sentences.
Well, can short, simple sentences be concise diction?
Sure.
They very well can.
Oh,
Uh, If you'd like to use concise diction, there's one thing you should avoid, and that's nominalization. And it's when you change a simple verb into a noun, right? By changing the context of the word. So you could say, she made the decision to have lunch, like a nerd. Or you could get straight to the point. She decided to have lunch, like a total Chad, right? You just got to assert your dominance and make these sentences what they mean. You don't skirt around it. You don't add all these extra words for no reason. Another thing is vocabulary, right? If you use all these big old words that you barely understand, it kind of takes meaning away from the sentence. He clandestinely deposited the stationery beneath the escritoire. Or he privately set the paper under the desk. Which one makes more sense? It's the right one. Now, a good way to figure out if this is the right thing to do, ask yourself if the words you're using actually add detail to the sentence, right? Does the sentence make more sense with these extra vocab words in it, or are you just trying to act like a big shot? Another thing with showy vocabulary is, well, you may think you're using it to have the appearance of being a better writer. It can seem a little. It can make it seem like you're insecure about your writing, so you need to use bigger vocabulary to make up for it. So avoid that. In summary, avoid this showy vocabulary, avoid nominalization, keep your sentences to the point, and say what you mean. Also mean what you say.
Now, Mr. Midbroad,
Yes.
does this mean that I should never use big words?
No, you should use a big word if it adds detail to your sentence more than a simple word.
So if I were to kind of summarize this again, would be just to make sure that every word you use has a purpose.
Yes.
And as long as every word is purposeful, you're using the concise diction.
Mm-hmm.
If you're adding stuff to try to reach a page limit, then you're doing what?
You're being lame. Mm-hmm.
Verbose
Yes.
and flowery or flowery.
Yeah.
You still don't know. Very good, Mr. McFlowery. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Can you please press escape on that computer before
I would love to press this.
C-Bone gets up there? We're gonna get you.
Yeah, we're ready.
One way or another.
Let it here mentally prepare.
Gotta see the best spot.
No, because Spencer and Ryan are going last.
Hamburger!
It's not my document. That's my excuse.
Hey, D, thanks.
How do you do this?
All right, while you work on that, Jet and Stevie get up there and go.
Yeah, you guys
wanna
Oh my,
go.
I wasn't ready for that.
We'll do
3 minutes ahead of time. And which one are you doing, Jet, Steve?
Verbs.
What page?
692 to 694.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, the first one's direct verbs, and they're used in the form of to be and linking verbs. So the wrong one, these are two examples. The wrong one is always the first one. So I want to be an actor in my future. It's easier to just say I want to act in the future. So the to be is like unnecessary. So it adds to be to be more direct. So you don't use a lot of words that may confuse the reader on what the action is. So you find the simplest way to express the verb direct.
Hey, that kind of sounds an awful lot like what?
Concise diction.
Yeah.
The next one is precise verbs. So it changes the original verb to make the verb more accurate, unique, and descriptive to their actions. It particularizes. So you could say she is reading her essay, but that's kind of like simpling it down to what she's trying to do. And you could say she is sharing her essay with the class, which gives a better idea for the reader to know what they're doing in there.
So in that one, the second one's better than the first. Why?
It just gives the reader a better idea of what they're actually doing. Rather than
Is it
just-
concise diction, Mr. Midrod? I mean, I'm looking at these two sentences, and the second sentence is longer than the first sentence.
Yes.
What, yes, the what?
To your statement. You're correct. But it is longer.
It's longer. Which sentence more effectively demonstrates concise diction?
The first one.
Wrong. The second one.
The second one, because it's saying sharing rather than reading. So
It's
if
more-
she's just reading it, it doesn't say
It's
like.
more precise. So here's and this
Oh, I was
is
looking at the wrong place.
okay. So she is reading her essay. She is sharing her essay with the class. Which one of those two sentences is best?
The second,
And why is the second one better than the first, even though it's longer?
the second one details the situation. Where the first one isn't.
Right. First one's vague. So even though longer can still be concise, concise doesn't just mean dumbing things down to the most simple way of saying something. Does every word in that second sentence, Stevie and Jet, does every word in that second sentence have a purpose?
Yes.
And if I were to eliminate the word sharing, and I said she is reading her essay with the class, how does that change the meaning of the sentence?
It could say, or reading her essay with the class could be like a whole group could be reading like essays by themselves, or like in small groups, where sharing her essay lets reader know that she is speaking to the entire class.
Okay.
So active verbs, it makes easier to picture that subject doing something. They form efficient, powerful sentences, and you use verbs in an active voice. So the animals are being roped around the pole, and the animals have been tied to the pole. So any verb where the subject is doing something physically, and you use verbs that the reader can understand and can be read in an active voice.
So which one of those two sentences is best?
The second one.
And why is the second one why is the second one better than the first?
It's like simpling it down to like help the reader understand, whereas being roped around the pole could like confuse a reader. Whereas have been tied, you get a clearer image.
Yeah. And being roped, it's just a fancy way of saying being tied on. Right. So important takeaway with verb usage is to what?
Make sure they have their purpose and they're precise,
Which sounds an awful lot like,
concise diction.
which also sounds a lot like, right. Okay, good job. Hansford, you ready?
Yes.
All right.
Whoa.
That's what you're supposed to say.
Scroll.
Here we go. You threatened many times.
All right, today I'm going to teach you guys about subordination and complex sentences. Subordination is a way to make sentences longer by making one clause dependent on another. So you're creating a complex sentence with it. There's a conjunction at the beginning of a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence. There's an independent and dependent clause in this, and it makes, I restated that. Oops. There's 4 types based on relationship. There's contrasting. Examples are although, while, and whereas. Cause and effect 1, because, since, and so that. Condition, if, once, unless, should. And then a time relationship, when, until, once, and while.
Now, class, we've learned about sentence structures that involve those words. What are they?
They're not,
Well, yeah, the coordinating conjunction can be done to do what? Contrast.
Oh, I got my notes.
Coordinating conjunction can be done to what else? Cause and effect. What other type of sentence structure? Intro phrase. What words up there do you see start intro phrases?
although, while,
Because.
Pretty much every word up there except
when.
when I go to the store, comma, blah, 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 blah. Oh, sorry, it says so that. Never mind, I thought it just said so. So anytime you see a coordinating conjunction or an intro phrase that sentence is doing what, Mr. Hansberger?
Subordinating.
Subordinating, making something dependent on something else. And these are what types of sentences, Kyler? Are subordinating sentences short, simple sentences? Or sorry, are they common sentences? No, they are either periodic. If I have details in the beginning of the sentence, Mr. Gayasi, is that cumulative or periodic?
Periodic.
Right. If I get to the detail, if I get to the subordination at the end of the sentence, Mr. Midrod, that is a what?
Say it again.
If I get to the detail at the end of the sentence, is that cumulative or periodic? Cumulative. You kind of culminate in something. So do we see how all of these things kind of fit together in that way? All right.
But yeah, also pages are 1124 to 1127. So punctuating, the general rule, where'd it go? Is to use a comma to set off a subordinate clause in your sentence unless the sentence is really short. Non-essential information to the sentence can be separated with a comma. That's called the restrictive clause. Essential information after the independent clause doesn't need a comma. I mean, that's a non-restrictive clause. A restrictive clause is essential information after the independent clause that doesn't need a comma. Reminder, a dependent clause cannot stand alone. Never leave it with just a period or it is just a sentence fragment. And then the rhetorical use of this, it blends awkward sentences into smooth flowing sentences, making them easier to understand. You can use it to emphasize your independent clause, and you get the effect of clarity depending on where you place it. If you place it like, where'd the example go? Depending on where you place it in your sentence, it can make it easier or harder to understand.
So sometimes if I place it at the beginning, it might be confusing, and it would be more appropriate to place it at the end.
Yes.
And vice versa.
Vice versa. Too.
Okay. Wonderful, Mr. Hansberger. That's all we have time for today. For tomorrow, it's just 3 pages. Read the essay on page 539. It's a shorty. Just read it and work with it tomorrow.
What pages?
539.
So 539 to 540.
And then like 540. 541.
Actually terrified of that. 539.
No, not 550. No, 539 to 540.
539.